As I welcome you again to your morning devotion, this is a couple Joe right here on the Home Base Ministries Network. Good morning to the evangelist Dexter Friday, Sambre De La Rosa out there in the DR. Good morning to you and the lovely wife. I pray that God continues to bless you all and that union. Good morning to the Enrock family, Pastor Earl and others. We are in Ezekiel chapter 5 this morning, and Ezekiel chapter 5 begin on the completion of the siege, verse 1, with God directing the prophet to remove all his hair from upon his head and beard with a razor and then wait. The hair now represents Israel as a nation, a prophetic word. God directs him to divide the hair equally by weight in 3 parts. Verse 2, the first part is to be burnt with fire in the midst of the city. The second part must be chopped up with a knife, and the third part thrown to the wind, and a sword shall be drawn out after them. These acts show that the people of Jerusalem shall be gruesomely judged by God. Gruesomely. Because of their disobedience. Now they depict 3 different vengeful acts upon Israel. A third to be destroyed by fire. A third of Israel to be destroyed by division. And a third, the last third part of Israel to be scattered, he says, in the wind. Meaning they shall disperse in different directions without strength, and then pursued by violence, as the prophet says, a sword shall be drawn out after them to pursue them. Verse 3, God also directs the prophet to take a few in number and bind them in his skirts, so a few will be chosen and placed in captivity, bound in captivity. Verse 4, God directs the prophet to take 2 the separated here again and put them in the midst of the fire, telling him that as he does that, it literally represents a fire will come forth into all the house of Israel. Verse 5, God tells the prophet that the last part thrown into the wind, into the midst of the fire, is Jerusalem, which depicts the inhabitants of Jerusalem, who that fire shall come into. He says that he has made Jerusalem to become the center of attraction to all the neighboring nations. God is not sparing them any embarrassment, and he won't spare you. God compares, verses 6, God compares Israel's disobedience and lack of regard for God's commandments and instructions to the ignorance of the nations who are not of him, saying Israel has hated him because of their disobedience more than those who do not know and worship him. And God declares this as a wicked act by Israel, not just sin, but wickedness towards him. The prophet says that Israel has changed the judgments, so it's not just that they have removed or have ignored the statutes, it is that they have literally changed them to suit themselves. And God hates that. His word must not be changed, it must not be added to nor taken away from. God hates that. Verse 7, the prophet then says they become more sinful than the nations around them, and that angers the Lord. Israel has blatantly disregarded the judgments and statutes and have acted as though no consequence would have came to their actions, as if they do not fear God. Remember that God even reproaches the remnant and takes them and destroys them further, verses 4 and 5. Verse 8, God says that because of their refusal, in verses 6, he will execute his wrath against them for the neighboring nations to see how much he is against them in plain sight. Sin openly, you will be punished openly. Beloved saints, God's grace, he is mercy, he is love, and he deserves no disregard. And we should not think at any time that God, who is perfect and without sin, will accept from us the willful actions of our intentional actions against him. Be mindful of the purposeful actions of sin. You see, when our actions as so-called Christians or blood-washed or believers are to be compared to the actions and lifestyles of the unbelieving, and accounted for as not equal but worse than theirs in behaviors, then we have totally disregarded God and put ourselves in line for whatever burning action of his choice to come upon us. What I'm telling you is, do not allow your actions to ever be compared to those of the unbelievers. If you do, God will surely take his action against you openly. Believers, look at your actions today before God compares you to who doesn't know him and embarrasses you. I'll see you guys tomorrow. This is Pastor Solomon De La Rosa.